Hello, friends. I want to talk today about 3 addiction studies that people reference constantly on the internet and almost always get fucking wrong. And the studies are fine, they're good, but the conclusions that people draw from them are just, let's say, creative. So buckle up. Okay, number 1, James Olds and Peter Milner, 1954, studying rats' learning behavior. And essentially they took a probe and they put it in a rat brain and they let the rat hit a lever and it would stimulate whatever part of the brain the probe was in. And what they accidentally found out, that electrodes that were implanted in the midbrain, particularly I think it was the medial forebrain bundle part of the brain's reward circuitry, when the electrode was in that area, the rats would hit the lever repeatedly. And when I say repeatedly, I mean fucking repeatedly, like thousands of times, to the exclusion of all their rat responsibilities. They wouldn't eat or drink or play with other mice. They just hit the lever over and over and over and eventually died. And essentially what that amounted to was that stimulation was activating the same dopamine reward pathways that drugs of addiction activate. So this was the first experimental evidence of the brain's reinforcement circuitry. And it really laid the foundation for everything we know today about like dopamine and reward and addiction. So in real life, what it means is drugs don't just feel good. They actually directly hijack the brain systems that evolved to reinforce survival behaviors like food, social bonding, reproduction. That is important because it tells us that addiction is not just about bad decisions, it's about biological reinforcement mechanisms. Study number 2, 1970s. Everyone loves to talk about this one. Rat Park. Okay, let's talk about it like really. So Bruce Alexander did this one. It was in the late 70s. He basically built this rat fucking paradise. Big cages, other rats, lots of toys, like good times for the rats, social interaction. Then he gave them access to morphine-laced water. And the claim that everybody likes to use online is that if rats are happy and socially connected, they don't take drugs. But that's not what the data of that study actually showed. Some of the rats still consumed the morphine. They just consumed a little bit less of it than rats that were isolated in small cages. And there were some limitations to this study. There were small sample sizes, inconsistent replication, methodological differences from other addiction models, and in fact, most labs have never been able to replicate the same effect. But the study still matters because it did highlight something important, which is that environment does influence drug use. So isolation, stress, deprivation, they will all increase your vulnerability, but connection and enrichment will reduce it. But it doesn't eliminate addiction risk. If environment alone prevented addiction, like, I don't know, fucking rich people with loving families would never develop addiction, and they do all the time. So yeah, Rat Park is a contribution to the picture, but it's not the whole fucking picture. And number 3, the study, the Vietnam veteran heroin study. People reference this one all the time as well. So this one was done in the early 70s by Lee Robbins. And so during the Vietnam War, heroin use among US soldiers was pretty fucking high, which seems reasonable. At one point, though, I think they were saying like 15 to 20% of soldiers had used heroin during their deployment. So there was this big fear of like, oh my God, what are we going to do when all these soldiers come home? Are we going to have like hundreds of thousands of heroin addicts returning to the U.S.? So researchers, what they did was they followed the soldiers after they returned, and what they found was 90 to 95% of the soldiers who had used heroin in Vietnam did not continue using when they returned home. And people on the internet love to use this as proof that addiction just disappears when your environment changes. But again, that's an oversimplification, because the soldiers who did continue using when they came back home were much more likely to have prior substance use, psychiatric issues, unstable environments, etc. So basically, the people who continued using were the ones who had multiple risk factors for addiction. The war environment made heroin accessible, but the vulnerability of who remained addicted still mattered. So essentially, that falls into the same pattern that we see in everyday people, which is that a large majority of people are able to use substances, even problematically, for a long period of time, and ultimately make the decision to stop when their life settles or stabilizes, or they make the decision to do so. But there's always that small population, that small percentage, who have those brain changes that make it really, really difficult for them to stop, that vulnerable population. So essentially, what do the 3 studies actually tell us? Well, when you put them together, they create like a pretty clear fucking picture. So addiction is influenced by 3 major forces, right? Brain biology, which Olds and Milner told us, environment and stress, the Rat Park one, and individual vulnerability, the Robbins Vietnam study. So addiction usually happens when all 3 of those things collide. It's not just brain, it's not just trauma, and it's not just bad choices. It's an interaction of biology, environment, and vulnerability. That's the real takeaway, not the simplified internet fucking version. Hope that helped. Thanks for hanging out. We're not just recovering, we're reconstructing.